So these sessions are recorded and put on YouTube, as many of you know. So if you happen to miss a class, you can catch up. If you want to review what we talked about, you can do that. If you just want to see my pretty face, you don't want to do that. So, but anyway, welcome. Just for everybody's information, there will be a testing session this Saturday if anybody is interested. You don't have to, but if anybody's interested, it's being put on by the Laurel VE group, which they do not charge for the test. If you pass the test, then FCC is going to charge you the $35 for the license. But the testing itself is free. If you don't pass it, you've at least taken a look at the test. So if you're interested, just go onto our website and pre-register. It'll be Saturday morning at 10 a.m. Right here. Okay? So if anybody's interested, that is being offered. And then, as I think we talked about earlier in the class, the week after our final class, we're going to offer testing on a Monday evening. We're all used to coming on Mondays, right? So we're just going to, the next Monday, we're going to do another testing session with the Laurel VE group. When we test with the ARRL group, there's a $15 charge for the test, then a charge for the license. So we do both, but I think the next ARRL testing session's in September, if I remember right. Yeah. So, all right. Well, tonight we're going to talk about communicating with other hams, and not really talking about bacon. So the things that we're going to cover tonight are where and how contacts are made. Using repeaters. We'll spend quite a bit of time on repeaters and how we use repeaters. How we participate in nets. We're going to talk a little bit about public service communications and amateur emergency organizations. And then we'll just touch on satellite operations. So yes, you can communicate with satellites. And you can bounce signals off a satellite. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But any questions from prior weeks before we get started into the new stuff?
Can you refresh me on everything we've already supposed to learn?
I wish I could. I wish I could.
That's what YouTube's for.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what YouTube's for, and that's what hamstudy.org is for.
Yeah.
So anybody that, as you're preparing for that test, I strongly encourage you to use hamstudy.org. And it gives you all the questions that are in the testing bank. And if you don't get it right, it'll tell you the right answer. And if you flip the card around, it'll tell you more information about it. So we've got a new individual with us tonight, and welcome.
Thanks.
And let's go around just so everybody knows who everybody is, because I can't remember. This is Denise. This is Howard. This is my wife, Penny. This is my daughter, Melissa. This is Lauren, Stephen, Kyle, and Pat. Matt.
Yes.
M-A-T-T.
Yes.
Gotcha. Well, welcome, Matt. We're glad to have you here in the class. All right. So, everybody remember when we talked about band plans, right? We talked about this sheet here, that the FCC has all these different frequencies, and we've got band plans where different things can operate. So amateur bands may not appear very large if you look at them on a chart. They look pretty small, right? But once you start tuning around on your radio, you're going to find that they're pretty large. And you can do a lot of things in a lot of different areas, which can make it confusing. If I want to do a certain thing on the radio, where do I go? What do I do? If I go the wrong place, am I going to be messed up? Well, that's one of the reasons that they set up band plans, so that we can know where to go on the radio to do certain things. Like if we want to talk on the voice, we go to a certain area. If we want to do CW, which is Morse code. Continuous wave. Yes, it is. That is what it stands for, continuous wave, also known as Morse code. If you wanted to do digital, like FT8, That's one of the digital modes. Yeah. That's a popular digital mode. Right now, there's one of our hams in the back room that's got his system up and running on FT8, I believe.
JS8 call.
Well, pretty close.
Yeah.
Or you could do JS8 call, which is similar to FT8.
Just with that vertical, he just hit the guy in Mexico.
So he's got a small vertical antenna just outside, and with that radio and his antenna that's small, and considering we're down in a hole, he just got a contact in Mexico.
11 watts.
And he's only pushing out 11 watts, so you can reach out. What keeps the different types of operating from being spread out randomly across the band? You know, if I'm looking to do CW, and I go to one place in the band, there's nobody else doing CW, it doesn't do me any good, right? They'll never hear me, I'll never hear them. But if we go to the band plan, we can know where to go and the different modes and activities. So amateurs created band plans to help organize the different modes and activities, just to kind of keep things organized and in a, you know, kind of a comprehensive way to know where to go. So band plans are voluntary agreements for normal operating conditions. Now, let's say all of a sudden we've got a hurricane coming through Minnesota. That would be a bad day, especially if a hurricane came all the way up here. But if that happens, we're not under normal operating conditions, are we? We wouldn't be. So some of that stuff kind of goes out the window, and we operate a little bit differently in emergency situations, so we'll talk about that. These band plans, they're not regulations. The FCC is not going to come over and say, hey, you're operating CW right here, you're going to get a $37,000 fine. Unless what? You're operating outside of your authorized privileges. Just like the guy in Idaho that tried to help out the firefighters, and he was operating on the fireman's band. And he was just trying to help. Put out his call sign. They knew who he was then, and he was on the wrong frequency. Okay? You don't want to do that. So the band plans aren't regulations, but stations are expected to operate flexibly. So, you know, as we, and when I refer to a station, what do you think I'm meaning? This area in here, a station? Yeah, but Rick's radio in his vehicle is a station. Okay? My radio at my house is a station. If I'm holding a handheld, that's my station. Okay? So that's what we're referring to. Basically, where we're operating and how we're operating, that's a station.
Okay, so anyone who's transmitting radio signals is a station?
Yeah.
All right, that's why we have radio stations. Commercials, okay.
Yep. You have.
Put it together.
That's commercial radio stations, you betcha. Okay, so by utilizing ham's radio's flexibility, you'll be happier and you're going to be more successful. Okay? Tune around the dial. Find out where you want to be. And then you can play there. And you're going to be happier because you're going to get people talking to you. And you don't want to go somewhere that there's no activity.
You don't want to do CW, there's nobody on that frequency.
Exactly. So
It'll not be fine.
there's some bands that may not have any activity on them. Some bands, people will say, oh, that 15 meters, it's just dead. That means there's nobody there. And so you switch around. You go up to 20 meters. You see if you can find somebody. And you will. You will. This is just an example of the 2-meter band plan. And you can see the different frequencies on 2 meters. And the different things that are in that band plan. At 144 to 144.05, EME. What in the world does EME stand for? Any idea? I'll give you a clue. The first word's Earth. The second word's moon. And the third one's Earth. Bouncing a signal off the moon back to the Earth. You can do that on 2 meters in those frequencies. 144.05 to 144.10 is general CW and weak signals.
So on the first one, are you only allowed to do CW in Morse code?
That is an area for CW, yeah. So you're sending CW Morse code up to the Moonshins.
And then does it bounce back?
And then it bounces back. Randy, you ever done EME? Randy has not done EME. That's something that he's going to have as homework. You do need an antenna to get up there. So, but anyway, you can see the different things. You can see down here where it says Oscar. What do you think Oscar is? And it's not the Grouch from Sesame Street.
Satellite.
It is satellite. It's. We'll get to it. I think I got the definition in here somewhere in today's.
What is Oscar? I couldn't hear.
It's a low orbiting satellite. So you can use that frequency to get to a satellite.
Those Oscar satellites are strictly for amateur radios.
They are for amateur radios. Okay, so that's just an example. And you can see the band plans for all of the frequencies. If you go to... Did I put it in here? Maybe not. ARRL.org has the band plans. Or you can just Google it, amateur radio band plans. You can get what the different band plans are. Yes,
So
Howard.
are all the band plans have breakdowns like that in them?
They do.
They do? So this is just a
This is a general where your different licenses where you can operate.
start and stop.
Yep. Very good question. Okay, so common uses that are listed in the band plans themselves. Beacons. Usually a beacon is coming from a station that is just sending out a beacon. So you can tune into that station and you can see if you're hearing them and how strong that signal's coming into you. Weak signals. Certain areas of the band that basically for weaker signals. And they're fun to play with. See if you can pick them up. Satellite uplinks and downloads. Simplex. That's another thing that's in the band plans. And what in the world do you think Simplex is?
Your repeater. Two times with repeater.
Just the opposite. But you're on the right track. So if I'm talking to Rick on the radio and I'm talking to him off the repeater, and Rick's 100 feet away from me, and I'm bouncing off a repeater that's 5 miles away over to him, I can turn over to a different frequency that's called Simplex. And Rick and I can talk back and forth directly without going to that repeater. It's just radio to radio. And that's a frequency that's just set aside for communicating just radio to radio. And there is a national calling Simplex frequency, which is 146.5200. And I'll show you that in a little bit. Then other common thing in the band plan is repeater. Their inputs, their outputs. What frequency are they coming in on? What frequency are they going out on? And then control links that are linking different repeaters together. So making contacts. So before you transmit, make sure that you are authorized to use that frequency. Okay? Just take a look at this chart. I'm right here. I'm safe. I can operate there. And don't operate on the edge of it, because you're going to go over.
Stay away from it.
Just stay away from the edges. Every once in a while, I'll see somebody that is transmitting on Parks on the Air right on the edge of the frequency, and I'm going, what are you thinking?
It goes over, it bleeds over.
And if you're bleeding over, you're operating in a frequency that you don't have authorization for. So you want to stay away from those edges. And then you want to have radio manners. Okay? You don't say cuss words on the radio. Rick does not say cuss words on the radio. He's a good radio operator. You know, there's just certain things that you try to stay away from talking about.
Yeah. Cuss words, religion, politics.
Cuss words, religion, politics, because that can get things heated up. And you're going to hear people out there that are talking that way, but they're not operating with good radio manners.
You can do it, but you should.
But you shouldn't, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, if you have your extra license,
Mm-hmm.
should you still not operate on the edge of a band?
Correct.
Okay. Because that might get into a band that's actually for something else.
Yep, it's a
outside
band
of
that you're not authorized to operate in. So, for instance,
Getting into Mars or civil electrical, fire, police. You don't want to throw your call sign out and you just go crazy.
yeah, so, you know, for instance, I do a lot of stuff on 20 meters, right? And the voice part of 20 meters starts at 14.150 and it goes up to 14.350. You know, after I get past 14.350, I don't even remember who owns that above that.
I don't.
But-
I don't even bother because I know I can't go.
I know I can't go over there, so I make sure that I stay very far away from that edge. And that's where I say I've seen people operating on that edge, and I won't respond to them because I don't want to be over the edge.
A lot of times if you get near the edge, you'll notice it if you're not looking at your dial. What'll happen is as you're dialing 4347, 348, 349, 351, the radio goes silent. And then you'll get into that band.
The radio goes silent, and like on my radio, if I'm crossing a band, it'll beep at me. It'll let me know, beep.
Your tuner won't do anything because tuners are built on that band plan.
So, yeah, but that's a very good question. Okay, so making repeater contacts. As technicians, when you get your technician license, one of the first places you're going to go out and play radio, make contacts, is usually on a repeater. Because that's really where the action is on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, down in the areas where the technician's license really works. And so repeaters are frequently like social clubs. Within our St. Cloud Amateur Radio Club, we have 6 going on 7 nets that operate every week. Okay? And you can get on that. As a technician, you can get on all 7 of those and make comments.
They got a radio, they can get on them now. They just can't talk.
Yes. If you have a radio now, you can get on and listen. Once you get your license, you can talk. Okay? So repeater manners are shared by all repeater users. One of the things you should do is listen so you're aware if someone is using the repeater. If they're not using the repeater and you want to talk, you throw out your call sign. You would say something like, this is N0JFY, and you just throw out your call sign. If Rick happens to hear me, he's going to say something like,
N0JFY, K5C, how you doing today?
and then we start a conversation. It's that simple. Now, if nobody's on the repeater, well, they're not going to come back to you. Or if Rick puts out his call sign and I am not in the mood for a Rick conversation,
A lot of people aren't.
I don't have to answer him.
They don't want to talk.
But I will. If Rick puts out his call sign, I'm going to answer him.
So if you talked about this before, how far does a repeater go out, and are there different reaches for different repeaters?
There are. It depends on the power of the repeater and how much power is being put out.
So many variables.
So there's a lot of variables, but our repeaters go out about 40, 50 miles.
When I used to drive a lot, I would come up from, gosh dang it, I can't remember the name of that town, coming out of Bemidji. On one of my radios, I could get to 580 something miles away. That's rare.
That's rare, but it can be done. When we went up to Camp Ripley this spring to work with the Scouts, we set up an antenna, and we were hitting the repeaters down here. and having the scouts talk back and forth to other ham operators down here. And so that's to the repeater. Well, if you got somebody, that far away on the other side, and just think of the miles that you can cover by going through that repeater.
Cover a lot. And that's the difference between simplex and repeater. Simplex is pretty much line of sight.
Yep. So when we traveled up to Ripley, we all tuned our radios to the simplex frequency, and we were able to talk vehicle to vehicle, but not all that far. So one of the things you want to do is you identify your station legally, and to legally identify your station, you are basically giving out your call sign. Then you're legally identifying your station. About 10 minutes into that conversation, you will come back and say, N0JFY for identification purposes. Just so people know who is talking and who's on there. If you got a conversation going on, you don't know who the heck they are, and all of a sudden they start talking about swearing and all other kinds, you want to know who they are, right? But it's legal. It's a legal requirement that you identify yourself on the radio. And then you want to pause briefly between transmissions to listen for another station that might be trying to break in. So Rick and I may be having a conversation, and Randy back here comes in with his call sign, and he'll come in WJ0L. And that means that he wants to break into our conversation, and he probably wants to say, Jeff, shut up, you're talking too much,
On that same note, if Randy comes in and before he even says his call sign, it goes break, 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 50 days in a row, we stop talking. That's an emergency.
Yes.
Not break 1-9.
Not break 1-9, but break, break, break. That means I'm breaking into this frequency. I have something that's an emergency, and I need to share it right now. Okay?
I've had that happen one time. Break, 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 look on the interstate.
Yeah, you just need to be aware that that's happening. So, using a repeater, you are responsible for operating legally, not the repeater owner. Okay? So, I get on the repeater and I don't give my call sign, and I'm not using radio manners, and who's responsible for that? Randy is the trustee of the repeater? No, sir. It's me. I'm the one that's responsible for that. So, yeah, just remember that you're responsible for whenever you're transmitting. It's you. So the easiest way to make a contact on a repeater is, as I said, just put out your call sign. And many stations are going to add a few words to make it clear that they would like to make a contact, like N0JFY is monitoring. Okay. A lot of times you'll hear if we're on the 147015 repeater, a lot of people will say N0JFY monitoring the 015. So they know where you're at and what repeater you're on, and then they can come back to you.
Yeah, if you get gas, but they heard the radio, they know where you're at, because they can have the radio on scan.
Yep. Okay.
Going back to the first one on there, you were
Yeah.
responsible, so I think I learned this, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's the station operator, the station owner, or whatever you're called,
So
that's actually responsible for whoever is on his station, correct? So if someone's speaking on your station and they do something wrong, it's actually your responsibility, is that correct?
It's the control operator of the station that's responsible. Okay. So if, for instance, Melissa doesn't have her license, she can talk on the radio. She can talk on the radio today. But I would put out a call like N0JFY, and I have someone else who wants to talk. And I'd give the microphone to Melissa. And I would be responsible for everything that Melissa said. But yeah, excellent point. And
One thing, just what you said that is, it's a little gray area, you gotta do homework, but there are instances where you do not have to have a license. Rick's van is broke down, you see me laying out on the road, I'm having a heart attack, you can get on that radio and you start, fire out, emergency, emergency. Give the information if anyone's gonna care for Rick. they'll be here. But in an emergency, you can use the radio.
Yes. Yeah, you can, you know, you got your technician's license and you find Rick's out there having a heart attack. We're in a life and death situation, right? So he's only got an HF rig in his truck. And you're a technician. I can't operate an HF rig and make it to anywhere. In an emergency, that doesn't matter. Okay? Life and death situations and imminent loss of property. Those two situations, you get on any radio any way you can and you get information out there.
But it better be an emergency.
But it better be an emergency, yeah.
We're out of ice.
We're out of ice is not an emergency.
No, well, it happened once here. Yeah. We're out of ice because the beer's getting hot.
All right. So just a hint for everybody. Listening to learn is a sure path to success in a ham radio. Turn on your radio and just listen. When I first got my license, I wasn't talking much. I was listening. I was listening to others. I was listening to how they came on the radio, what they said, how they communicated back and forth, how they ended their conversations. I was just listening to learn, and that's a great way to learn. So Melissa, you can come down to my radio and listen anytime you want.
This isn't CB. Break. Good buddy.
Melissa's going to shoot me once we get home, I'm sure.
Is he going to take you after you get done here? Oh.
All right. I have not. That would be a good topic. Lee, come and talk to us about Kurt chunking.
Anybody smoke, get a light off his forehead when he starts talking.
My pet peeve is people chunking the repeater. That simply means you're keying it up. You don't throw your call sign out, you don't do anything. You've got it, you're chunking. And I have 1,000 times gone back to people that chunk it and say, yes, the repeater works. And by FCC regulations, you must identify it. And that's true. I hate when people chunk it. I also tell them, every time you chunk it, you take one heartbeat off of the repeater, you take one heartbeat off of every radio that's listening to that repeater. And it drives me nuts. We've had people sit there and chunk 6 or 7 times. And we don't know who they are, of course. We could probably find out if we took the time and do a Fox on, which is directional finding. But that's iffy at best. So don't chunk my repeater.
So what does that mean when you say you take one heartbeat off?
It fires up the repeater. So it's using that repeater. So I'm saying it's taking one heartbeat away every day. They all have a lifespan. Everything has a lifespan on it. And that's taking one heartbeat away every time.
Not only does it repeater get the signal, like in our case, we got to record it, or most IDs or CW. We're just going to put that out. So there's more and more heartbeats that are listening.
And again, don't forget that every radio that is listening is keying up as well, taking power, etc. So
Yeah, they're all hearing it.
don't feel bad if you want to use it. Like Jeff was just saying, throw your call sign out. And if it doesn't come back, you'll hear the repeater come back because it'll chunk back to you. Use it. That's what it's there for. Throw your call sign out, and if you get to talk to somebody, great. If not, okay.
And you know, a lot of times people might do that, and I'm just saying they might do that just to see if their radio is working. But the best thing to do in that situation, let's say I want to know if my radio is working, if I've got it set up right. I'll just go N0JFY, monitoring. Or I'll go N0JFY, is my radio working for a radio check?
Signal recorder, radio check. Yeah.
And somebody will come back and tell me, yeah, it's working. Or if nobody's on the repeater, the 015 will come back with some little kids' voices. And they'll tell you that it's the repeater. Most of them, they'll come back with Morse code, with a Morse code signal for the ID of that repeater. So you get that return, and you'll know your radio is working. But put your call sign out there, and there's not. That's the way to do it. That's the right way. Okay. So if you want to respond to a station asking for a call, or you want to contact a station whose call sign you might already know, just say the other call signs, other stations call sign. Like I said, Rick is KU5MC. I'd say KU5MC. This is N0JFY, and he'll come back to me. And if someone is on the repeater and you interrupt them, what happens? Let's say Rick is talking to Lee on the repeater, and I get on and I just throw out my call sign. What's going to happen?
Well, one thing we would acknowledge you, you know, and we can probably just come up. Don't get confused with call signs. You'll get them in your head no time at all, unless they change them.
Unless they change them.
And you'll know the voice. So you got a little leniency. Hey, Jeff, how you doing? But if it was just me and him talking about we stayed at Pesties all night, we don't want anybody on there. Hey, Jeff, can you give us a few?
Yeah.
N0JFY, can you give us a few? Whatever.
Or they'll come back and say, well, this repeater is in use. And you don't panic. If that happens, do not panic. It's okay. It's fine.
Well, that's a perfect example. Skywarn. If the repeater is in use, we will announce this is a Skywarn activity. Please don't utilize the repeater right now.
Yeah, so Skywarn, if anybody's not aware of that, that's when we've got severe weather coming through the area. There's trained Skywarn spotters that are ham radio operators that are out in the field watching the clouds and seeing what's going on. And we got a control station here that's keeping in contact with them. And there are times during a Skywarn activation, what we call activate the repeater. So that's what it's being used for at that moment in time. It's being used for emergency transmissions. And there are times even during that emergency transmission where it may be quiet. You may have 5-10 minutes where there is nothing happening on that repeater. It's just quiet. So somebody, might get on there, and that's fine. And what will happen is one of the control operators will come back and say, this repeater is in use for Skywarn activation. Can you please clear? That's absolutely fine. And what I would do if that happened to me and Lee came on and told me that this was activated, I would say N0JFY clear. And I would just, or I'd say sorry, N0JFY clear. And I just clear the repeater.
Yeah, don't get butthurt. You didn't know. But the control operator will come back and say this repeater is used for Skywarn activity right now.
Or it might be in use for a net or something. And if it's in use for a net, you can join the net.
I was going to say, if you get on the net, you better join in.
And we'll talk about nets in a little bit here. So anyway, repeaters. We've talked about repeaters. Where do you find them? There it is. There it is. You can come down to the clubhouse and you can go into the corner and you can find this chart. Okay? And this shows some of the repeaters that are here in our area. And they are on our website. Yeah. And in addition to that,
Pull the paint off.
I'm hanging on the podium.
there we go. They won't pull it off here.
Casey, if you do that, she'll have you. Your wife would say, I used to be married.
So anyway, these are some of the repeaters here in the area. But you can also go out to what is called Repeater Book, repeaterbook.com. You can go out to the ARRL repeater directory, and it'll show the repeaters across the nation.
There's also an app.
There is an app, yep. So you can, let's say you're traveling across the country, you got your radio with you, and hey, I'd like to make some contacts, over here in Pennsylvania. But I don't know any of the repeaters in Pennsylvania. You go to one of these sources and you can find the repeater, you can find their frequency, what they transmit on, what they download on, and it gives all that information in these websites.
You mentioned earlier, control links.
Control links.
We've got one here in Minnesota, up in Brainerd, Bemidji. I can't remember the other two cities. They have 4 control repeaters that are linked. I can remember when I used to drive around to be on the same frequency for 3 hours driving. I think it just hit me when you started talking about that.
Yep.
So,
Yes.
so who runs these? Or are these operators that have an extra license to put a repeater in, or?
So a lot of them are owned by radio clubs, like we own several.
Okay.
Or it could be an individual operator that happens to have a repeater that they put out there for use for the public. And
So these are individuals, they're not like automated stations or anything like that, they're somebody's facility or home.
they can be, the repeaters are operating 24 hours, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
So it's not like someone is there operating it,
Yeah.
but they have it set up so that it comes in and out.
Is there a separate licensing for
No, not licensing.
A lot of paperwork.
that? Okay.
Yep, there's paperwork to get one up and running. So this I took this from the repeater book online, just to show some of the repeaters that are in Stearns County. And I just went to the county.
You can see who so to speak owns them, like 225, maybe 0SV.
W0SV, that's the call sign for our club.
Our 015, our primary one, owned by Randy's got his signature on all of them. We maintain them and run them.
So basically, you can look up that call and you can see who the person that's assigned to that or organization that's assigned to that repeater.
I'm just curious if there's, is that a need or is that everybody's always looking for more kind of thing? Do you saturate?
Yeah.
There's too many?
No, there's not too many.
Never enough.
Never enough?
Yeah.
If they bleed over ours, we just run their tower over.
All right. But good questions. So accessing a repeater. How do you get into a repeater? We know we've gone here and we've seen, okay, there's a 147015. It sits in Collegeville. It's in Stearns County and it's owned by W0SV. How do I get onto it? So the things that you need to know is what the repeater's output frequency or transmit frequency, the frequency the repeater's transmitting on. You need to know that. And then you need to know the input frequency. They're different. Okay? They're not the same. And then you also need to know any access tones for that repeater. So the difference between the input and the output is called the shift or the offset. And if a repeater's input frequency is higher than the output frequency, that is a positive offset. If the input frequency is lower than the output, it's a negative offset. And you program your radio to have the offset in order to reach that repeater. So your radios get programmed. If you got, you go pick up a $30 Baofeng, right? You can program into that Baofeng the input and the output frequency and the tone. So, yeah, here we go. So for instance, and I think my pointer is on my desk at home. I think that I found it in my backpack and I took it out. Stupid me. Okay, so 147015, the offset is 0.6 megahertz plus. So what does that mean, 0.6 megahertz plus? You take the frequency of 147.015 and you're going to change it to 147.615. So, because it's a plus, you add it to it. Now, if it was a negative, like we see up there at 146.835, it's minus 0.6 megahertz. So that one would be 146.2350 would be the offset frequency. Okay? Then it's going to ask you for a tone. And the tone is what is needed to actually impact that repeater, to wake it up so that you can hit it, so it recognizes you. And so like on the 147015, it's got a tone of 100. And that's in the programming of your radio. You program those in, and you want to key up the repeater. I turn to the frequency that I see on my radio is the 147015. I key it. It says I'm transmitting on 147.615. And I say N0JFY, and it's got a tone of 100 programmed into my radio, so it hits the repeater. That's how it works. So it sounds a little complicated, but it's not really. The easiest way that I found to program a radio is using software on my computer. It's like and if anybody's ever used Excel, it's almost like an Excel spreadsheet. You got the one frequency, you got your off frequency, you got your tone. And then you can put in some words, like on one of them, how do I have mine labeled? Where is it? 443.4500.
That is the repeater in this state.
That's the repeater that Rick runs a net on every Saturday at about 7:15 p.m. It's called the Saturday Night Shootout. Okay? And so he runs that, and I've got that. I actually have that labeled on my radio, Saturday Night Shootout, just so I remember where I got to go. So.
Yeah, software is a lot easier.
So,
Baofangs are real easy.
Yeah, Baofangs are easy, but it is easy with the software. Yes.
I see one up there that says closed. What does that mean? It's not operational?
It's not operational.
They got too close to our band, so we took out the tower.
Sorry.
No, they're just not operating at this point in time. Yeah.
A little spicy Play-Doh helping.
Yeah, they're just not operating right now.
That one's been off for quite a while.
Okay. So, as I talked about tones, most repeaters won't pass a signal from receiver to the transmitter for retransmission unless it contains a special tone. That's where tone 100 I mentioned on the 015 repeater. The tone is, there's 38 different frequencies that are used. They're all below 300 hertz, and each repeater can have a different tone. So the tone indicates to the repeater that your signal that you're sending is intended to be retransmitted by that repeater. So you also have digital repeaters. That we've got ham radios that can go almost anywhere, right? They walk around. You can have them at home. You can have them in your car. You can have them in your hand. So you can roam freely with them. And then the internet provides a high-speed connection between 2 points. Well, somebody along the line says, well, why don't we combine those two? Why don't we get the availability of having the flexibility of ham radio and put it with a computer? Well, they did that. And they've made digital repeaters. So a digital repeater, this is just kind of an example. Digital repeater, you go from your radio to a local repeater, which happens to be a digital one. It goes into the PC. It connects with somebody else's PC, and then it goes out to somebody else's radio. On a digital repeater network, you can actually talk to somebody around the world on digital. Now, I'm not a pro at digital. That's an area where I need to spend more time and get more expertise. But I do know that I can hit we have a Central Minnesota DMR repeater that's close by, and I can hit that, and we actually have a net on that Sunday nights, so people can talk on digital. When you talk on digital, it turns your voice into a digital signal. Sounds a little bit different than the other radio signals, but you can still hear and you can still figure out who's who.
An FT8?
Nope, not FT8. This is actually voice. But FT8 is another digital form where you actually connect to the computer. And so that's a good question. Simplex channels, we kind of talked about those a little bit earlier. They're just locally, where you can see, line of sight. And an example is the National Simplex calling channel on 2 meters is 146.520. There's a national calling channel on 70 centimeters, which is 446.000. You don't have an offset, you don't have a tone on these. You just tune up that frequency and you can talk. And so if you're anywhere in the country, you can try to get on Simplex and see if there's anybody out there listening.
So basically a high power walkie-talkie at that point.
It is. Yep, exactly. Okay, so SSB, single sideband, CW, Morse code, and digital contacts. Starting contacts in these modes is just a little bit different than on a repeater. You need to attract the attention so that the person on the other end has time to hear you and know that you're there. And so this is done by calling CQ. And CQ basically means that I am calling any station anywhere. That's what CQ means. It doesn't mean that I'm going down and getting me a quarter or whatever. I am looking for a contact from anyone, anywhere.
I heard someone say they explained it as if I'm seeking you, CQ.
That's a good way to do it. I'm seeking you, CQ. Yeah, that's a great way to think of that. So the station that's calling CQ sends CQ several times, followed by their call sign. For instance, if I was trying to find somebody out there, I would go CQ, CQ, N0JFY, and monitoring. It means I'm looking for anybody, anywhere, and this is me. If I don't hear anybody for a couple of seconds, CQ, 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 this is N0JFY. Do that several times, and most likely if somebody's out there listening, they're going to come back to you. I remember one of the first contacts I made, there was a gentleman calling CQ. He was going CQ, CQ, and he gave his call sign mobile in Maryland. So I said, well, what the heck? threw out my call sign to him, and we made a contact. And he was just cruising down I-95 in Maryland and in his car, and so we made a contact. And you just, you never know. If you're on CW or the digital modes like FT8, you actually put in this into your computer if you're doing FT8, and you would put in CQ, CQ, DE, your call sign 3 times, and then K. And the computer will send this information out to other computers and radios, and they'll pick this up.
So you would be typing that on your keyboard.
I would type that on my keyboard, and if in FT8 you type it in one area and it just stays there until you change it. And you can transmit that just by hitting the transmit button. So it's pretty easy. And when you put that K at the end, it means I'm done. This is the end of my transmission. Just so that they know that, okay, now I can transmit. Okay? That's what that K stands for. The DE stands for this is. So CQ, CQ, this is N0JFY, N0JFY, N0JFY. Okay? And that's what that stands for. Now, before calling CQ, this is my favorite topic here. Make sure that the frequency is in your band privileges, in your license privileges. And also listen to make sure the frequency is not in use. And then you make a short transmission asking if the frequency is in use. If you dial in and you listen to any of our nets, one of the first things that they're going to say, and it comes to my mind, Jim on his net every Tuesday night at 7:15 or so. He will say, he'll come on, he'll say his call sign, KE0BEH, is this frequency in use? And he'll say that a couple of times just to make sure the frequency is clear. And then he'll go in and start the net. Because he doesn't want to start on top of a conversation that somebody else is having. Okay? So you just make a short transmission and see if the frequency is in use. Right, Jim?
That's right.
All right. I caught his attention. I knew he's around here somewhere. Okay. So when let's say someone's out there and they're calling CQ, and you want to talk to them, Let's say that the Jim, KE0BEH, is calling CQ. Call CQ for me, Jim.
CQ, calling CQ, AE0BEH, calling CQ, standing by.
Okay, and I want to answer him. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go KE0BEH. This is N0JFY.
N0JFY, KE0BEH, now clear, now copy.
And I copy you 5.9, which is a good signal. And then we can start a conversation. And it's as easy as that to start a conversation on the radio.
And then you jump up and down and go, I got him, I got him.
I got a contact, yeah. Okay. And one of the things that you're going to find, especially when you start listening to HF, is people will use the phonetic alphabet, and you're encouraged to do that. So when I'm giving out my call sign to Jim on HF, I will say, this is November 0, Juliet Foxtrot Yankee, and 0JFY in the phonetic alphabet. Why do you think I would do that?
It's easier to understand.
It's easier to understand.
I have a question.
Yes.
So there really is a real phonetic alphabet that has every letter?
Alpha, yes.
But where do we get that? I mean, I just figured people were pulling words out of the air, you know.
No, there is a phonetic alphabet. You can find it on the ARRL site, or you can find it on Google. When I first was trying to figure out what the phonetic alphabet was for my call sign, I just Googled it, and it gives you a list of all the alphabet and the phonetic, and it's an international standard, okay?
There have been a couple over the years. I think there's a European or maybe there's a couple different models, but they've standardized on, I forget the exact name of it, if it's universal or if it's
Yeah,
a certain name.
I think it's IUT or something.
But yeah, it could be. Yeah.
But it's standardized, and it's after a while you really get to recognize it. You know, Alpha, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Foxtrot, and you can go through the alphabet fairly quickly if your mind works quicker than mine does. But you'll hear those call signs, and it's because it's important to understand. We were listening to a call that came in the other day to the radio here, and I can't remember what the call sign was, but we were between Randy and I and who was it? It was Rick, and we were trying to determine whether it was a B or a D in the gentleman's call sign, and Randy and I thought it was one, Rick thought it was another, and this was one time that Rick was right. And
Alpha Delta 0 VE.
yep, that's right, Alpha Delta 0 VE. And we kept thinking it was a B, and Rick was saying it was a D, and he was right. But if he'd come in with Alpha Delta, we would have heard it. When it comes to an AD0VE, you know, it's kind of hard, but the phonetics really helps to make sure you get your call sign correctly. You're also going to hear a lot when you're on the radio. You're going to hear Q signals. There's different. It's a different alphabet, basically, or a different terminology for using Q. You're going to hear QRT, which means this is where I'm at, my home base, QRT. You're going to hear QRM, which means I've got noise, and mechanical noise. You're going to hear QSY, which means I'm going to change frequencies. And so there's a lot of different Q signals that you're going to learn. You're going to learn them as you go. You're not going to... I don't have them memorized. But this is a list of some of the Q signals that are out there. QRL, I'm busy. QRP, decrease your power. You're going to hear QRP a lot because a lot of people will operate with QRP rigs, which means it's a low power rig. They're not operating on high power. They might be operating on 5, 10, 15 watts. They're not operating on 100 up to 1500 watts. They're operating QRP, which is low power. You're going to hear QRZ, or as people will say, QRZ. And that means, who is calling me? You'll hear that a lot. I hear it a lot when I do Parks on the Air, because people are looking for contacts. And rather than put their call sign out immediately after another contact, they'll just put out their QRZ. And if you've been listening to them, you know who they are, and then you throw your call sign out and talk to them. So we got a lot of Q.
Why are some of them like dual? Like, I have nothing for you without you, anything for me. Is it two different meanings for QRU, or is...
Yeah, it could be. It's basically saying QRU. You know, I don't have anything. Do you have something for me? I'm not going to be. I don't have anything to give. But what are you wanting, or what do you want to give me? So, yeah. So there's a lot of different things that you know, the Q, and it's just a shortcut to put out there rather than saying, I'm looking for a contact. QRZ. It's just a quick, shorter version to put out there on the radio. Just a shorthand.
rather than CQ?
CQ is another way. If you've been in a conversation with somebody else and you're looking for another contact immediately, and they know who you are, you'd think other people are out there listening, you just go QRZ and they'll come back to you. You're going to hear a lot about Dxing and contesting. There's a lot of contests that happen. People have fun on the radio. They get into contests, see how many contacts they can make, whether they can who's can contact the farthest, how many they can contact. That's contesting. Dxing is trying to get people that are far away. So a DX contact, for instance, you know, if I contacted somebody from here to Collegeville, that wouldn't be a DX contact. But if I contacted somebody from here to Australia, that's a DX contact. So when you hear about DXing, that's really long distance, usually on HF, where people are trying to make contacts, you know, long ways away. And that's what they call DXing. So the DX stands for distance station, looking for a distance station. You can also get video over the radio. There's amateur television. I have not played with this. I don't know, Jim, have you ever played with the video stuff on radio? So it's a niche. If you're interested in, you can get into doing videos and stuff over the radio. They also have slow signal TV. Slow scan TV. And so there's a lot that you can do there. Nets, we've kind of talked a little bit about nets. You'll hear the word net often in ham radio. Nets were actually developed in the early days of radio. And so these nets, or networks, that's what net stands for, is a network. They were developed to help stations meet on the air to share news and messages. The modern network, now associated with computers, is a direct descendant of the radio net and uses many of the same terms and concepts. So you've heard of the nets at work, right? Or you know, you got a net maybe at your home, a network. Same type of thing. Both things together. Came from early days of radio. So no matter the purpose or status of the net, a station with emergency traffic should break in at any time. We kind of talked about that. The net control station who is running the net and the members of the net should always immediately suspend any lower priority operation and respond to that emergency. And that's immediate. You just drop everything and let that emergency station come right in. Okay, communications for public service. So ham radio is used a lot in public service. Some of the areas that it's used in is Skywarn, which is, you know, when severe weather comes into the area. Skywarn train spotters, and all of you can become a train spotter. We offer the class, and if we get enough interest, we can offer the class lots of times. And I'm
People go there to teach you.
we can even go there to teach you. We've done that. There are ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Service. There's RACES, Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Service. A lot of different ways to get involved. And we'll have news for our club around ARES coming up shortly. So we talked about this earlier, just briefly. Threats to life and property. The FCC also recognizes the need for flexibility in emergency. For example, there's a part of the Part 93-403, which is the regulations for ham radios. It states that no provision of these rules prevents the use of it by an amateur station of any means of radio communication at its disposal to provide essential communication in connection with the immediate safety of human life and the immediate protection of property when normal communication systems are not available. Now, if your normal communication systems are available, I have a cell phone and I can call 911. Call 911. Okay? But if that's not available, let's say I'm out in the woods, I'm out in the mountains of Idaho. There's no cell signal. And I need to get communication out. My buddy just broke his leg, and he's going to die on me if I don't get him out of here. And I can't carry Rick that far, okay? So I'm going to call on my radio on any channel that I can get anybody to answer me, right? So that's an emergency situation. But if I had cell service in the mountains, 911. Okay. I knew I had the definition for Oscar in here. Satellite operations. Amateurs have built satellites. And they've built more than 50 satellites since 1961, launching them with extra space and available rocket payloads. Okay, so you got extra payloads in a rocket that's going up, they'll launch these satellites up there. And the amateur satellites are nicknamed Oscar. And it stands for Orbiting Satellite Carrying Amateur Radio. So that's what Oscar stands for. Now, I couldn't remember that from last night to this morning, but that's what it stands for. Orbiting Satellite Carrying Amateur Radio. I can remember Oscar. Okay, I know that that's an amateur satellite. So, communicating through an amateur satellite sounds like a very complicated high-tech effort, but it can be quite simple. What you need is a radio that can transmit on one band and listen on another, and most can even be handhelds. One of our members of the club, when we were up at, I may have mentioned this before, when we were up at Camp Ripley, he had a handheld and he had a Yagi antenna, and the space station was coming into view across the horizon. He picked it up, he got the signal from the space station, he was able to hear their beam coming down, their transmission, and scouts just loved it. He was listening to the space station as it came overhead. Gets out of sight, well, he loses it. An hour and a half later, it came back again. So with a handheld, 5 watts, he's able to listen to the space station.
Because these little satellites, some of them run milliwatts power now.
Yeah, they run very.
The best antenna in the world. They're up there.
They're up there. They've got great ability. This is just kind of some of the frequencies that the satellites operate on. And you can go online, and there's special websites that will show you where that satellite is and where it's coming across, when it'll be overhead of us. And that helps to monitor them and to be able to contact them and make that connection. So there's some definitions that go along with satellites, and some of these are on the test. Apogee. The point of a satellite's orbit that is farthest from the Earth. Okay? Apogee. I remember that because I had that on my test and I couldn't remember. Is that apogee or perigee? But it's apogee. A beacon, that's a signal from the satellite containing information about that satellite. Doppler shift, this is a shift in a signal's frequency due to the relative motion between the satellite and the Earth station. So those satellites, they're moving around, they're turning. I'm sitting here, I'm stationary, but it's turning, so my connection with that antenna on that satellite is changing, so that becomes the Doppler effect. An elliptical orbit, an orbit with a large difference between apogee and perigee. Kind of think of an egg shape, right? It's not round, coming around the Earth, but it's coming out and it's coming back close and it's coming far. It's coming close, it's coming far. That's an elliptical orbit. A LEO, not a lion and not a local law enforcement officer, but a LEO is a satellite in low Earth orbit. Okay, so it's up there ways, but it's low. Space station. So a space station is defined by the FCC as an amateur station located more than 50 kilometers above the Earth's surface. That's the definition by the FCC. Spin fading, signal fading caused by rotation of the satellite and its antennas.